Hello everyone, how's it going? And welcome to my Wild Rift tier list for patch 5.0b. It's been about a week now since the release of patch 5.0b. We got new updates, we got new reworks that are coming out very soon, specifically to WUKONG, and we also have the release of TALON. So obviously we're going to be going through all of them, and we're showing you all what champions have moved up and down in my tier list. But as always, I always want to hear from you, the community. Let me know down in the comments what you think of the tier list, and let me know what champions you've been playing right now, what champions you think are incredibly powerful. Obviously this tier list is just my opinion. Everyone has their own opinions on tier lists, but with this tier list I've taken in multiple factors: how easy the champions are to play, what's their carry potential, and everything like that as well. Obviously I've had my own games, I watch pro play, I watch other streams as well, high elo streams, so there's a lot that I take into account with all of these tier lists. Right, let's start things off with the Baron lane. A few changes in the Baron lane, specifically to the tanks like Set and Dr. Mundo. You can see at the moment that they're both sitting in the S tier. I think both these champions are still incredibly powerful, Set and Dr. Mundo, with the likes of Hot Steel and also Titanic Hydra. Both these champions are incredibly strong, especially Dr. Mundo. I think he's a bit unkillable at the moment, to be honest with you. I think he's one of them champions that are just absolutely crazy how strong that they can actually be right now. Other than that, in terms of the rest of the tier list, S plus tier hasn't really changed too much. Renekton actually received a buff this patch. I thought he was already pretty good. He's already been buffed like 5 or 6 times in the past, and he just keeps getting better and better every single patch. They just keep buffing him over and over again, and if they just keep on doing this, he's just going to become stronger and stronger. He's just going to become completely unkillable in the Baron lane. He does, however, fall off a little bit in terms of scaling when it comes to mid and late game, but early game Renekton is still really powerful and probably the strongest in terms of the early game. We still have the split pushers like Jax, Fiora and Camille. All three of these champions are incredibly powerful. You have Aatrox in there as well, and then you have, in my opinion, still the best tank of them all. In my opinion, better than Set, better than Dr. Mundo, better than Sion or even Shen, I think is Ornn. I think the amount of crowd control that Ornn brings to a team fight, just being able to craft any item out of base, allowing that to also happen to your allies. If you're standing close to an ally, they can also craft any item outside of the base as well. I think them benefits, on top of how tanky the champion is, how much crowd control and just the team fight presence of Ornn, makes him the best tank for me right now. But I think it is very closely followed behind by other tanks that are in S tier. Shen, obviously with Titanic Hydra, is very powerful, especially for the split pushing, and you can also go for items like Heart Steel. Set and Dr. Mundo I already mentioned, but both of these two champions are still incredibly strong. Same with Sion, also really strong. And then we have Garen. Gragas, you can play a bit more as the tank. Did get a little bit of a buff in the most recent patch in terms of his ability power ratios. If you play him kind of as an off tank, so a little bit of ability power but also a bit of tankiness at the same time, I think he could be very powerful in the Baron lane right now. Maybe Gragas deserves to move down, maybe to A tier. I don't think maybe he is as powerful as the rest of these champions sitting up in the S tier. Move down to A, sorry. Darius is still really good. I think his fighting potential is really powerful, and he is still very strong. Yone as well for the scaling in the late game. His early game is still really good. The great thing about Yone in the Baron lane is that you can pretty much play safe. You have your shield on your second ability. You have your third ability that you can use just underneath tower, go up, farm a few minions, and then go back to your shadow, so you don't actually have to, you know, worry about playing too over aggressive or anything. Gwen is just very good overall. I think she's very powerful. Akali, especially with the armor buff that she got in the most recent patch, I think is going to be better in the Baron lane now. And she's not as good as what she is in the mid lane still, in my opinion, but the damage on her passive going up and also giving her extra armor really helps her in the Baron lane, because her passive damage is really good when you're trading in the early game, and the armor obviously helps a lot against all these bruises that you're going to be up against in the Baron lane. Jace still really powerful as well in the Baron lane with first strike or pretty much any rune that you take. Really good poke, really good all-in potential, and as I mentioned with Gragas, still could be very good. Moving down to the A tier, now we do have the WUKONG rework, which is coming 20th of March or somewhere around that time. Can't remember the timeline exactly, but there's still quite a long way to go for WUKONG until we get to that rework point. I think after the rework, Wukong will be S or S plus tier. I think the changes that they're doing to with Wukong, sorry, with the reworks means that he's going to be incredibly powerful. He's going to get a lot of extra armor. He's going to get a lot of extra health regen and just have a lot more trading potential in the Baron lane. I think at the moment it's okay because you do have a lot of survivability with the healing that you get on the first ability, but I think the extra stats that you're going to get with the rework Wukong is just going to be a lot better. But for now, he still sits in the A tier. Again, I think he's going to move up to the S and F plus tier when that rework comes through. Oh god, this champion has suddenly been on the rise. Honestly, you could be tempted to get this champion up to even S tier now. The changes that they made to Urgot are really good, really powerful and very strong. I think that Urgot can definitely move up into S tier as well. I still think it's a champion that a lot of people probably have to get used to overall, because he's not been in the meta at all. Ever since Urgot came out, he's never really been good. But his recent buff with his damage buff and also the movement speed buff as well when using your second ability is huge for Urgot. Means he can move around champions a lot more often, use the shotgun with all of his legs, and also his legs come off cooldown a lot sooner as well. So you can deal so much more damage overall. And even players are building Titanic Hydra and Heartsteel on Urgot, so he becomes unkillable, but he also allows him to do a lot of burst damage as well at the same time. So again, Urgot, incredibly powerful champion, I feel like. And Kennen is another champion that I think is doing it really well at the moment in the meta. I think Kennen's probably a little bit better in the mid lane than the Baron lane, since you can do like a little cheesy trade with Electrocute. But I think overall Kennen still works really well in the Baron lane. Teamfight potential for Kennen is just absolutely nuts, absolutely crazy. Teemo's still pretty good. A lot of early game pressure, a lot of early game power, and obviously that cheesiness with the Teemo shrooms. Vladimir, super late game scaling champion, a lot better in the mid lane because you have a lot easier time farming in the early game, but late game in both lanes you'll still scale and do incredibly well. Yasuo, I think Yasuo with this type of tank build is probably better in the mid lane. You can proc Grasp the Undying a little bit better in the Baron lane, but again, just the trading potential and the fighting in the early game kind of is the weak side of Yasuo. Irelia is still really good in the Baron lane, can still do really well. Same with Riven, and obviously Malphite is still there as a tank. I don't think Malphite is as strong as a tank as the other ones above. Moving down to the B tier, Tryndamere I haven't actually tried too much. I need to try out Tryndamere and give him a try, because I think his buffs have a lot of potential, especially his buff to his first ability, giving him more healing and also more attack damage over the course of the game. So I do think Tryndamere in the Baron lane could be very viable. I just have to try him out or give him a try. I haven't really seen too much Tryndamere in any of my games. I haven't seen a lot of players playing Tryndamere as well. So let me know what you think. If you've seen Tryndamere, if you think he's a lot better in the Baron lane, please do let me know. Olaf Baron lane, just not very good, unfortunately. Pantheon just has a lot better time in the jungle. Same with Volibear. You know, most of these champions have a lot better time in the jungle and just doesn't have that same presence in the Baron lane. KO I think can still work. I still think KO can be good in the right circumstances. It's just you're very weak until level 5, and even after level 5 it still could be very difficult. I've realized though that Kraken Slayer KO is actually really strong, because your third ability procs a stack of Kraken Slayer and actually works as an auto attack reset. You can actually proc the true damage from Kraken Slayer very quickly. So that could be very good. Nasus just takes too long to scale in my opinion, and Singe just doesn't really offer too much in general. Moving into jungle hasn't really changed too much, to be honest with you. There's a few move arounds like up and down here and there, but in terms of the strongest champions in the jungle, we still have the same champions. You know, these champions have not changed at all. They've just been incredibly powerful for such a long time now. You think of all these assassins, Kha'Zix, Evelynn, Shadow Assassin Kayn, Lee Sin as well also does a lot of burst damage, and then even Hecarim with his survivability and also his damage. So all these champions just offer this great carry potential, which is what you need in the jungle. You need to be a main carry. You need to look for early ganks. You need to try and get your team ahead, and you need to get them kind of the momentum going in the jungle. So all of these incredibly powerful champions, I don't think there is going to be anyone that can knock them off the list, to be honest with you. I think all of them are still really good. S tier, again, champions that are still, you know, really good in general. Gragas, I stayed at S tier, even though he did receive like quite a few big buffs in the most recent patch. I still don't think he's S plus tier worthy. I think he's just a lot less reliable, in my opinion, than the other assassins, even though you kind of play Gragas as an assassin. But in that sense, he's a lot less reliable. He doesn't have as much mobility as the rest of these champions. He does have his body slam, which obviously he can get from here and there, but it does have a pretty long cooldown. And when you do use your body slam, you're kind of in the fight and there's no way for you to get out of the fight. Whereas like Lee Sin can dash away, Hecarim has his healing, Kayn can use his ultimate, Evelyn can use her ultimate or turn invisible, Kha'Zix can jump away. You know, you see how you have like the upside of these champions with engaging, but then you also have the upside of the champions in terms of disengaging as well. Whereas Gragas is like, you jump in, you do a lot of damage. Yes, you can one-shot someone, but then you're probably trading your life for it as well. So it's just trying to weigh up in terms of that situation. Other champions, I don't think there'll be any surprise here in the S tier. You know, Riven, great mobility, really nice when you're playing around in the jungle. Vi with her lockdown and her crazy damage. Xin Zhao as well is probably one of the most underrated junglers, I think, at the moment. I think Xin Zhao is incredibly powerful with all the buffs, with how much damage and burst damage he can deal. Jarvan with the lockdown and heavy burst damage. Yone kind of same as a Baron lane with his scaling, allows you to farm jungle pretty quickly. Wukong, in terms of jungle with Wukong, I'm not too sure if he's actually going to be that good in the jungle after rework. I think he works okay in the jungle at the moment. Maybe not S tier, maybe I can move him down. But I think in the jungle he can still work, you know, relatively well at the moment. I think after the rework, it probably might not be as great. Aatrox, really good as well in the jungle. He had a lot of damage, a lot of survivability. Jace as well, again with his poke, really good. And if you want to go for Red Kayn, that's still another option. You can still go for Red Kayn and still have pretty much the same sort of outcome as Blue Kayn. It's just Shadow Assassin Kayn has more damage potential, when Red Kayn is more to do with survivability and also crowd control. A tier again, I mean, A tier is pretty stacked. These champions are very difficult to kind of rank in terms of tiers. I feel like A tier is like the kind of middle of the pack. Like the champions are good, but they also have downsides at the same time. You think of someone like Morgana, for example. You know, Morgana has probably one of the fastest jungle clears in the entire game, but a downside is she doesn't really have that same carry potential, really. You know, yes, you can go in with your ultimate, you can go with your second ability, you can do a lot of damage, but if you get caught, if you get crowd controlled or anything like that, then you're just going to, you know, basically get one shot because you're not building a lot of tanky stats or anything like that. And again, it's all to do with kind of survivability. But all of these champions are, you know, really good in general. Gwen's really good, again, for her scaling. Shen, you can just AFK through the jungle, farm through the jungle, and use his ultimate whenever you want to on any one of the lanes and use that as a gank. Rengar and Pantheon kind of work as the same thing, where they both have great one-shot potential, especially Rengar trying to jump in with his ultimate. Nautilus, a lot of crowd control, a lot of burst damage as well with his AP build. Same with Diana, a lot of burst damage. Echo as well also has a lot of burst damage. And also Zed can still work in the jungle. Tankiness, you got Nunu. Nunu can still work as the tank in the jungle. Volibear just doesn't have the same damage output as before. His healing and everything is still there. His survivability is still there, but he just doesn't deal that much damage as what he used to before he had the nerfs. Olaf can still work in the jungle, but I think it's just a lot more difficult to get online, a lot more difficult to kind of get that going. Darius can still work in the jungle pretty well. Fizz jungle still really good. Dr. Mundo have actually moved up to A tier in the jungle as well. I think surprisingly Dr. Mundo's jungle clear speed is actually not that bad overall. I think the only downside is that you can't get Heartsteel stacks really in the jungle. You can still build Heartsteel. Titanic Hydra is obviously incredibly good in the jungle because you can proc down your jungle camps, which makes your jungle clear speed even quicker. But in terms of Heartsteel, you can never really get that many stacks. Fiddlestick still really good. I think his champion is still incredibly strong, especially with his fear if he can use his ultimate out of vision. And Camille also can still work pretty well. B tier again, champions that maybe you could work in lower elos, but the higher you up the higher up you go in terms of elos, they get a lot more difficult. I'm thinking of champions like Rammus, Mumu, Shyvana, and also Tryndamere. I think these champions can work in lower elos, but I think when you go up the ranks, when you go up into higher elos, and when people start to realize what the counters are or how to play against these champions, then they become a lot more difficult to kind of execute and a lot more difficult to carry with. But even though they're down to B tier, they can still work completely fine. Fiora's just not really that good anymore as a jungler, but you can still farm and still do relatively well. Lilia is okay, same with Graves as well. I think both these champions definitely need a buff, Graves and Lilia. Both these champions are not really too great at the moment. Irelia is okay in the jungle. Obviously, you don't get your stacks as much, but can still work. And then CT, you have Master Yi and Warwick. I think both these champions are still terrible. Even Warwick after the buff is still bad. Master Yi after several buffs is still pretty bad as well. Again, these champions are just really easy to lock down. You just get hit by one crowd control, or you can just get one shot. The problem is like Warwick and Master Yi cannot one-shot someone. They need to ramp up over time. But you play against like Kha'Zix, Evelyn, Shadow Assassin Kayn, Lee Sin, Hecarim, you're just getting one shot. And you don't have the time to ramp up, basically. That's my opinion on them. Mid lane. Let's see what we have for the mid lane. So you have Aurelion Sol. I moved up into S+ tier. To be honest, I probably should have done this before his hotfix. The last time I did a tier list was when the hotfix buff came out. I predicted that he was going to be an S tier, but he's actually a lot stronger than that. And even after the nerfs that he got in patch 5.0b, he's still S+ tier. The big thing is that the nerfs didn't really change too much with Aurelion Sol. It's just you have to collect more Stardust now to do more damage to tanks. But if you're not against tanks, he still does the same thing. He's still super annoying to deal with. It does have the slow with Royal Eyes. Has a lot of burst damage as well, thanks to his passive. And his ultimate is just incredible as well in team fights. So he joins the S+ tier with the likes of Jace, Syndra, Vladimir, and Kassadin, like we had in the previous patch. All these champions are still incredible, and they're still really, really good. And I still really enjoy playing pretty much all of these champions. S tier, again, pretty much the same champions. I don't think I've actually changed anything. No, I haven't changed anything at all. So these mid lane champions are just the same in terms of tiers. Yasuo, Yone, you know, the brothers are still really good in the mid lane. Orianna, her late game scaling, still really good. Ari with the catch potential with her charm, and also all her mobility with her ultimate. Vex as well with her burst damage, really, really good. Irelia in the mid lane, also very good, especially against mages. Irelia does incredibly well because you can play aggressive during the early game and get that advantage. Zoe's still super annoying to deal with and still really good. Honestly, I could probably move Zoe up to S+ tier. This champion's disgusting. Akali still sits in S tier as well, with the even with the buffs. I think she's very strong, but I think she can definitely be countered by a few things. And I've also moved Lucian up as well. I'll talk a little bit about Lucian a bit more in the ADC tier, but I think Lucian is really, really good right now. Whether you play him as a dual lane champion or if you play him as a mid lane champion, I think in the mid lane against these weaker champions during the early game, you think of Kassadin, Vladimir, Aurelion Sol, Syndra, you know, all four of these champions need a little bit of scaling. You play someone like Lucian, you play super aggressive during the mid lane, you can easily get 1 or 2 kills in the early game and then snowball that advantage into the mid lane game with Lucian. So I think he is really, really good. A tier, you have all the champions here, and then we also have Talon sitting in the A tier. I don't think this champion is good at all. To be honest, he hasn't had the same popularity as other new release champions. I don't think this champion was going to be very popular anyway. I think if I was to predict kind of what tier he would be in, it would probably be A tier as well. You just think of, you compare Talon to other champions that are in the mid lane, or just other assassins just in general. You know, you think of Talon compared to like Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, Evelyn, you know, even other assassins, Vladimir, Kassadin, even champions like Aurelion Sol. Like, Talon basically has no damage. Like, the champion doesn't really do that much damage at all, and I don't think Talon is very good at all. I think he's okay, like, don't get me wrong, I think he can still carry and he can still do a lot of burst damage, and there have been some games where Talon, you know, if you're ahead, can be very, very strong. That's why he's not in like B or C tier. He's in A tier because he's like in the middle of the pack for me. It's like some games he could be good, but I have seen the downside of Talon, and I don't think there's a lot of playmaking potential there. I do think he does need some buffs for sure. His win rate must be terrible. I'll be totally honest with you. I wouldn't be surprised if Talon's win rate is terrible. Actually, I wonder if the Chinese website has been updated yet. I think it's still the 22nd of February. So yeah, I don't think they have Talon in here. Nope, no Talon. No Talon yet on the Chinese win rates, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's like down at like 40% win rate. Like he's not that great. Anyway, moving on. Still champions in the A tier. They're all really good. You know, all these champions can still work very well. As I mentioned, Kenna mid lane, I think can work really, really well, especially with cheesing these early weaker mages in general. If you run Electrocute, can still be really good. Same with Gragas as well. I think with his buff, he has a lot more trading potential in the mid lane. Ziggs is still pretty decent. I don't think Ziggs is still as good as what he was before his rework, but I still think it's okay. Fizz can work okay in the mid lane. Lux with her poke and her wave clear can still work really well. Veigar with lockdown, one burst damage, one shot damage pretty much is really, really good. Zyro with her plants, really annoying to deal with. I think in terms of crowd control during team fights, and also poke damage is really nice. Diana with her burst damage, the same with Zed, really, really good. Twisted Fate, I still think is also very good as well. I don't see him as much because he's a bit, you know, a bit less of a carry, more of a utility champion with things like his stun cob. I still think he's good. Swain's pretty decent. Katarina obviously received a buff in the most recent patch. I think Katarina is pretty good in general. I think the only struggle with Katarina is that you have a lot of crowd control in the game right now, which is a big downside to Katarina. So there's not a lot of ways in which you can utilize Katarina to her best because she's very comp reliant, if that makes sense. Like, you either need setup on your team, like someone like an Alistar or a Leona that can stun on each enemy champions and allow you to jump in, or you just need to not have a lot of CC on the enemy team so you can freely jump around and do as much damage as possible. Echo's still pretty good as well. Akshan, really good early game and late game scaling, and Galio with the crowd control. B tier, I don't think Kai'Sa mid lane is really a thing anymore. I can probably delete Kai'Sa mid lane. It's just not really a thing anymore at the moment. Just doesn't really do too well. There's just a lot of other mid laners that just scale so much better than Kai'Sa right now. Annie's pretty okay. I mean, you have you know, a bit of one-shot potential with her Tibbers and everything else, but other than that, that's about it. Seraphine doesn't really offer too much in mid lane. Corki is just really bad right now. Probably one of the worst AD carries, to be fair. Karma did get a bit of a nerf. I think she can still work okay in the mid lane. She's just a lot more passive mid laner that just kind of sits there and wave clears the whole game, and that's about it. Pike can still work in mid lane, but it's a lot more difficult to kind of utilize. And C tier, we have champions like Morgana, which just kind of puts her pull down and just goes AFK. Singe mid is not really a thing anymore. Brand, and also Kayle, which I think Kayle can still work, but I think it's a lot more difficult. I actually think Kayle probably has an easier time in mid lane than what she does in Baron lane, because at least in the mid lane, if you're against these other you know, early game champions that also doesn't have a lot of kill pressure, Kassadin, Vladimir, Aurelion Sol, Syndra, like, you can actually farm up and you can actually, you know, scale with Kayle. So I think mid lane Kayle is probably better than Baron lane Kayle. Right, ADC I've changed quite a lot in. There are two champions right now that I think are incredibly strong in the dual lane, and I think a lot of people will agree with me with this. There's probably maybe one or two more champions in the S tier that I could also move up. I'll talk about them later. But Lucian and Caitlyn. Lucian obviously received a buff in the most recent patch. The buff was pretty much useless, but I think for quite a while now, Lucian has been quite strong, especially after patches where they buffed his first ability, they buffed his base damage overall. I think the build with Duskblade plus Solari Chargeblade and Bloodthirster, like that really aggressive build, sudden impact, Kraken Slayer, you know, super hyper aggressive early game build is so good for Lucian. You know, most of the time you're winning in the early game with this build. You just need a bit of setup or a bit of help in your lane. You can dash in, proc Kraken Slayer, do a whole bunch of damage as well, and I think he's great. He does fall off a little bit in terms of scaling, but I think with the help of the second ability getting buffed, I think his middle lane game becomes a little bit better. And it kind of depends what support you have as well. But he has a lot of mobility and a lot of burst damage. And then Caitlyn is just one of the most annoying champions, I think, to play against in a duo lane. I think everyone that plays duo lane, whether you're a support or an ADC, everyone hates to play against Caitlyn. This champion has the longest range of any champion in the game. And this really comes to her advantage. You know, you can walk up to minions in the laning phase and you'll just get not one shot by Caitlyn, but you'll just get poked down by Caitlyn a lot. She'll just auto attack you, use her first ability, which does quite a lot of damage, and she'll just keep poking and poking and poking. But a great thing about Caitlyn as well is that she also has a great late game at the same time. Her late game is really, really powerful. Her attack speed that she gets and her headshot damage that she gets is really, really powerful. She has a little bit of self-peeling as well with her traps and her net. So I think overall Caitlyn is an overall great champion. I don't think there's anything really bad or wrong with Caitlyn right now. I think she's overall a great champion. She might lack a little bit on the damage side, but that comes in, kind of counteracts itself when you talk about her range and her CC and everything. And again, her self-peeling. S tier, there are some champions here that I think can move up into S plus tier. Varus, I've actually been playing a lot recently. I think Varus is very, very good. I actually have to change Varus's build because he's actually running phase rush at the moment. I think Phase Rush Varus is really, really good. Conqueror Varus is also still very good, but Phase Rush Varus is incredibly strong. Sorry about that. Yeah, Phase Rush Varus, just because the extra movement speed that you get, especially on a champion like Varus that doesn't have a lot of mobility, I think really benefits him a lot. Tristana's pretty good. I think still relies a little bit on having an enchanter support next to you. But I think in terms of damage, Tristana's not really there. I think she's okay, but she's not really there. Ezreal, just very difficult to execute in general. I think that a champion that relies a lot on skill shots means that champions are going to technically perform less on him. I think if you understand Ezreal and if you can play Ezreal and if you can land his skill shots, then great. I think you're S+ tier. If you can't, then he's probably down A tier. So that's why he's kind of S tier, kind of in the middle of the pack. So if you're good, it goes up. If you're bad, it goes lower. Zeri, again, another champion that can perform pretty well. I think she's decent. I think she can perform well. I think the problem, again, is kind of the way that her auto attacks work. It can get blocked by minions. It can get blocked by tanks. She's very difficult to play, again, because you have to rely on your ultimate. You have to dash quite close because her auto attack range is not that strong. And again, she's very different to other AD carries where she can't lock onto a target and auto attack them. She has to go through minions and monsters and everything like that. So again, pretty difficult champion. Severe, really, really good. Her movement speed that she gets from her ultimate is very powerful. Her spell shield is also very powerful to block any sort of crowd control that's coming her way. She has a lot of wave clear, which I think is the huge thing with AD carries. Having a lot of wave clear, whether you're defending or playing aggressive, I think is very, very good. Xayah with her self-peel, and her feathers are very, very powerful. And Samira. I think Samira, after her buffs, I think she's really, really powerful. Yes, she's very difficult to play, but I think these buffs that they keep giving to Samira is just making her even more powerful. I think she's probably one of the strongest AD carries right now. The reason why she's not in S+ tier is that, again, she's very difficult to play. In terms of her ultimate, you need to make sure that you get your combos off correctly and you stack up your ultimate. But yeah, she's still really, really good. Jinx relies a little bit too heavily on enchanter support. Same with Vayne as well. I think both these champions can be very good and can scale very well, but relies a little bit on enchanter supports. Some of you might be surprised, actually, that Kai'Sa's sitting down in A tier. The problem with Kai'Sa right now is that her laning phase is awful. Like, probably Kai'Sa has one of the worst laning phases in the game. And if you think of all these champions at the moment that are above her, I think all of them beat Kai'Sa in the laning phase. Once Kai'Sa gets her first ability evolved, maybe she can be a little bit stronger, but even then, you know, Lucian just destroys her in laning phase, Caitlyn as well, Ezreal can just poke her, Varus can poke her, and Kai'Sa can't really do too much during the laning phase. Kai'Sa's a champion that you kind of sit AFK during the laning phase and you hope that you can scale. You hope you get up to 2 or 3 items and your team's not too far behind. Then you can actually be a champion. Kind of similar to like Vayne and Jinx as well. You know, all three of these champions scale really well. And if we talk about, you know, who are the best late game champions in terms of AD carries, then she's definitely up there. But in terms of the whole game as a whole, very, very difficult. Draven, a complete opposite, one of the strongest early game champions in the game. But if you don't know how his mechanics work and if you don't get any early kills, then kind of useless. Same with Fortune, one of the best early game champions. Again, when it comes to mid and late game, I think she's very difficult to kind of pop off, because especially because her ultimate, she's basically can't move or can't do anything at all. Jhin just doesn't really do more damage at the moment. Champ's not really that good. Ashe is okay. I think Ashe can do more damage. I've actually been playing Ashe a little bit. I think she does a little bit more damage than what I thought she would. But again, she's more utility than damage. Neela, again, relies a lot on late game scaling and enchanter supports. Corki's not that great. And then Twitch as well. Again, not very great at the moment either. And then finally, we have supports. Again, not too much has changed with supports. I have moved kind of the S and the A tier, some of the champions around quite a bit. In terms of the S+ tier, I don't think any champion is going to beat any of these. Soraka, the best enchanter right now that you can play by far. I don't think it gets beaten at all by any of the other champions right now, especially after the Yuumi rework. Pyke, best carry support, sorry. Really good with roaming, really good with the crowd control, and obviously the execute and the ultimate means Pyke support is just really, really good. You just give a lot of gold over to your team. And also Lux as well. Again, very strong carry support. Her first ability, being able to go through minions and hit champions, is just way too strong in my opinion for a support. S tier, you have the strong tanks, which are Thresh, Nautilus, Leona, and Rakan. All these champions. I mean, Rakan, you could play it as an AP or a tank. In terms of like pure tanks, Thresh, Nautilus, Leona, All three of these champions are really great tanks. They take a long time to kill, and also they just have a lot of playmaker potential. You have a lot of crowd control, you have a lot of engage potential, and you could be the one to start a team fight and possibly end a team fight as well for the enemy team. Same with Rakan as well, whether you build him as a tank or full AP. Both concepts of Rakan are very powerful. Sona moving up to S tier. I bet you definitely didn't think of this. Now, Sona is one of the easiest champions to play in the game. I would say at times maybe even better than Yuumi to play. Her ultimate, it got a lot easier to use. Her passive means that she's actually a lot stronger now during the laning phase. I honestly think Sona is not one of the weakest laning phase champions now. I think that stun that she got from a passive made her a lot stronger during the laning phase, which means you're not an AFK bot. Well, I still think you are an AFK bot, but you're not as AFK as what you were before. Her passive is really, really strong. It means it can proc Glacial Augment and be very, very powerful. Yeah, I really, really like Sona at the moment. I think she's super, super easy to play. She's a great support to play as well. She has the crowd control for the outplay potential. She has a lot of shielding, healing, movement speed. She has it all. Karma, even after her nerfs, I still think is very good. I think this champion's a great carry champion overall. And then Lulu and Yuumi. Yuumi I've moved back up into S tier. I don't think she's like broken anymore. I just think she's S tier. I did have her in A tier because I did predict that the rework wasn't going to be that good, which I still don't think it is. I still don't think Yuumi was as strong as what she is before, but she is a lot easier to play. You don't actually have to jump out an enemy, jump out of your allies anymore. You don't have to jump out and auto attack. You just land your first ability and you proc your passive basically. A tier, I've moved some of the champions down. You know, when looking at the S tier and when looking at the tanks and the enchanters, I had to move some champions around. The enchanters that I moved down were Nami and Janna. I don't think these two champions are near enough as strong in terms of enchanters compared to the likes of Sona, Karma, Lulu, and Yuumi. And the same with tanks. I don't think Alistar has the same playmaking potential as the tanks. He does have his combo, his Headbutt Pulverize, which I think is pretty good. But I think overall there is a lot more playmaking potential and carry potential with the other tank supports. But still here you have other tank supports as well. Galio, Brom, Gragas, and Ornn. I think all of these are very good, especially Ornn is super underrated. I think Ornn is an incredible champion. Zyra is pretty good as a carry, but not as strong as the others. And Senna as well can also be pretty good. B tier, Swain, Ashe, Set, Seraphine, and Blitzcrank. All unique in their very own ways. I think like B and C tier are a lot more unique supports and a lot more out of the ordinary supports, but I think can still, you know, perform pretty well. I still think these champions can still work and they can still be very, very good. Just execution wise, I think that's what might struggle with them. But yeah, that's everything with the tier list. I don't think there's much else to really go through. There's been a few changes with Baron lane, jungle, mid lane, dual lane support. There's been a few changes here and there. Obviously the new champion Talon, which I'm not really too excited about. I haven't really played them too much, but yeah, that is pretty much everything. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you all enjoyed me having a run through all of these champions and an updated tier list. Obviously, if anything does change with any of the champions or if any of the updates come out, obviously with the next patch notes, I'll do another tier list and then you can let me know what you think. But as always, take care of yourselves. Have a good rest of the day. I'll see you all next wild video. Peace.